This is the Dover Download Podcast. My name is Christopher Parker, and for the past 25 years, I've had the pleasure of working with, learning from, and talking to a variety of volunteer, staff, and community members. This podcast explores conversations, activities, and a variety of policies and programs which exist here in Dover to improve the community in one way or another. We are continuing our series on planning board members here in Dover and looking back at their time on the planning board. Again, the planning board is an appointed role that the city council appoints. Today, we are meeting with John Swartzendruber, who was on the planning board starting in 2003. John, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
So, it's August 2003, 20-something years ago, and you are welcomed onto the planning board. What should the listener know? Why did you want to get on the planning board at the time?
Well, I had been wanting to get involved in the community. My wife and I had actually just purchased our second house in Dover and was looking for different opportunities to be involved in the community and whatnot. My father-in-law, ironically, had been the planning director in Portsmouth for the late 70s into the 80s, had done a lot with Market Square and had done a ton of work with planning there. He had suggested that I might want to look at the planning board and to get involved in that way. And that's, I think, how it kind of happened.
Nice. So you're on the board, and your memories from the time, were the board members collegial? Was there a camaraderie? Was there different factions? What was the board makeup and tone like?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was interesting because I didn't have a lot of experience. These were a bunch of people that I got to meet over the time. There were some folks that came in from, as an example, the place that I worked, but a great experience with getting to meet the different people that were involved with the board. It was definitely a diverse group of folks. I think at the time you were the planner and Steve Stansel was the director at the time.
Right.
And don't think there was a lot of turnover or change there for the first few years. So we got to know a lot of people, and then ended up working with some of them in other aspects of volunteering and that type of thing.
When you and I chatted the other day about sort of a pre-chat about coming on the podcast, you mentioned something that took me down memory lane that I thought, wow, I can't believe we did that. But you mentioned the delivery. We used to deliver the packets.
Yeah.
For those that are listening, the planning board has a ton of materials that it has to review for each planning board meeting. And historically, we would deliver, usually on the Thursday before the planning board, the plans and backup materials to each planning board member's house.
Right.
It was a combination of planning staff and inspections that would go and do those deliveries. And we stopped doing that maybe about 7 years ago when it was clearly a digital world.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it was great. You know, when we were talking before, I was trying to remember actually the year that I started, and I was doing that based on what house were they delivering those documents to, and it was our second house, and it was great. We would get that ahead of time, be able to take a look over it, see what was coming up, review, and then bring it to the meeting.
And just to clarify for the listener, while we don't deliver anymore, they do get the packet still on Thursday afternoon. It's just a digital packet to inundate your email as opposed to your mailbox. So you alluded to the company you work for. That's probably the biggest project that came before the board, which is Liberty Mutual's expansion in 2007, when it came forward with what's still probably considered the new Liberty building, or I think they call it Liberty West.
Yeah, Dover West.
Dover West, thank you.
Yeah, I think we called it Dover 2 or Liberty 2.
Yeah, at the time. So that project, which has effectively doubled the campus space for Liberty Mutual, one thing that I recall about that was the planning board had 4, if not 5 members that were either directly employed by Liberty or had spouses that were, and there was a concern on the staff level that we wouldn't have a quorum to actually vote on the application because people had to recuse themselves. I'm sure you recused yourself.
I did, yeah. And it was even a step further. At the time and still at Liberty Mutual, working in a IT real estate role, I was actually aware of and starting to work on that project from a Liberty perspective in the planning. And the way we typically do it is there's a small core of people that get together to plan the next real estate project. And as it expands, more people get brought in by Liberty. And at that point, I was aware of the project. I knew it would be coming. And some of the people that I still work with today were presenting that to the planning board while I was there.
You mentioned stability, and I recall that as well. I started with the city in 97.
Right.
And then fluctuated between community services and planning, locking down in 2002 in planning. And as you said, I was the city planner and with Steve Stansel as the planning director. What I recall was there was a real effort being made, and I think successfully, to build relationships between the board members themselves and the board and staff to really build trust and to build a positive experience for those involved. So when you had projects come forward, there was a real back and forth conversation as opposed to just presenting it and saying, hope you approve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we had multiple workshops, different gatherings to, go over what was coming up. Certainly the people on staff were always available to run things by, ask questions. In fact, I know we probably drug you in there. Some of those nights were late nights.
Yeah, that's true.
With what about this? What about the, back and forth? But yeah, it was definitely a good team at that time. Not only in planning, I think we had, folks from different areas also.
Community services always heavily involved.
That would come in and present, give their comments, made it feel more like a team effort, definitely.
When you look back on the time, it sounds like you look back positively.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the board itself, it has a lot of projects coming before it. How do you, as a planning board member, evaluate an application or a project? What goes through John's mind as you're either listening to the application being presented or when you're looking at that packet over the weekend before?
Right. Well, usually looking at it, obviously before, sitting on the board and really taking in a lot of the comments, the presentations. Also, we would have public forum, which of course was stuff that didn't come up for the board, but, people talking, but then a lot of the neighbors and different types of folks that would, the developers themselves coming in and talking really, I guess, opens your eyes, maybe brings something to you that you wouldn't normally think about, and certainly helps with evaluating the project.
When you look back on the time now, if you look back on it, which is probably being forced for you to look back on it, it's part of this, but if you're looking back, was it a positive experience?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just meeting people, being involved, getting to, when I came in, not a tremendous amount of experience, obviously, with this, but certainly the resources were there to learn. Extremely friendly people, and explaining kind of how the whole process works versus just, hey, they're going to present something here and we're going to vote on it. You got to learn, the whole process that everything, that the whole project goes through. A lot of work before, a lot of work afterwards. So yeah, I think it was extremely positive experience for me.
Good. When you decide that the time has come for you to pass the baton, how does that conversation occur?
Well, for me, I think it was a change for me at the end where my kids were becoming older. I joined the board with no kids. And then, had a couple children. And as they got older, activities at night and whatnot was forcing me to miss meetings, miss some things. And, at that point, just kind of made the decision that I would, leave the board. It's interesting because now having kids in college and talking to my wife, we're both volunteering for some things in town here. And it was just kind of ironic when you contacted me because it's probably time now to start looking for more volunteer opportunities and getting involved as my kids have gone to college. But really it was kids' activities and busy schedule that kind of forced the decision.
Right. You can only have so many balls in the air and you need to pick and choose at times.
Yeah. And when, really at the end feeling like wasn't able to give 100%, and it's like, you're missing meetings or you're, just definitely not fair. I don't know at that time if we did have alternates that were on the board, but that was something that, we would, as would bring in alternates and they would sit when a full member wasn't there. And it's like, boy, if we've got people that are willing to do this as an alternate, it's probably time to move on. So,
are there any goals you were hoping to accomplish or things that you wanted to see happen that you weren't able to during your time on the board?
It's interesting. We talked a little bit about Point Place first coming up. And I remember, not that it was a goal that couldn't be accomplished, but I certainly would have liked to have seen the rest of those plans. Because if you recall, I think it was the gas station, right, that first got approved. And I can remember, talking to my wife about that and what was planned and how things were going to be changing. I would have liked to have probably been around for the rest of that project, but where there was such a gap in time, obviously.
Yeah, that's an interesting project in that I think we started the drafting of the regulations in like 2005.
Right.
And then the first phase was probably approved in 2007 or 8. It's 2025 and they're finishing up the last phase.
Right. And sort of the same thing with, although different, with the waterfront development.
Right. Yep. Good things take time.
Yeah, it was a in and out there, and I was watching as it happened, and then I exited, and it's great to see, what's happening down there and everything that's transpired since.
The Point Place, the thing that always struck me with that was, two things. One is the only job I've ever been fired for was working at the farm that was there. Because I was not a good strawberry picker in high school. But having grown up on Dover Point, I always remember my mom saying that it was easier for her to go to get gas, go to a bank, or go to services in Portsmouth or Newington than it was in Dover because you had to go through downtown up to Northern Central Avenue. So when planning board and the staff started talking about more commercial growth in Dover Point, that was a great opportunity to say, what are we missing in this area? What can the community members of Dover Point take advantage of?
Right. And I'll tell you, I live off Dover Point, as you know, as well. And there was a lot of talk at the time that I was on the board, and the gas station gets approved and Point Place is something that we use all the time.
Sure.
We're down there to the different businesses that are there. I've got friends that live in that area, and it's fantastic.
Well, I appreciate you coming in today and having the conversation with us and strolling down memory lane. Was there anything you want to leave the listener with?
I would just say if somebody is actually listening saying, boy, I don't know about getting involved with something like the planning board or whatnot, I don't have the experience. You could take it from me that I didn't have a lot of background and experience. It was a great situation for me, definitely rewarding. And if there are people that are, thinking about it, definitely, seek it out, find out what's required and get involved.
Great. That is a great way to end the conversation. So thank you very much and have a great day.
You as well. Thanks for having me in.
As April showers turn into May flowers, we look back on what we did here as a city and a community through our boards, committees, and commissions. We're joined today on the Dover Download podcast by Brian Early from Media Services and Erin Bassegio from the Planning Department. How are you two?
Great. Good morning.
So, Brian, any interesting things happen in the month of April?
Well, it's been a light month for the City Council after they adopted the fiscal year 2026 budget at the beginning of April, which we covered in the last podcast.
Yep.
One item they approved that I know that will excite the city clerk is the authorization to purchase new ballot counting machines. These will replace the AccuVote ballot counters, which have served the city for years but are now obsolete and parts are no longer available for repairs. For people who, are at the end of waiting for the poll results, you won't hear that sound of the printing of these new machines. It's kind of like a regular laser printer style of results. City Council also approved a new water main to be replaced on a section of Oak Street and Broadway, which, Chris, it's been a site of many significant water main breaks in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. This has long been needed, and it's really, I think, the continuation of the work we've been doing to upgrade the whole Broadway, Oak Street, Central Avenue triangle there, beginning with the Broadway culvert drainage work that began and took a couple of years to complete. This is another one of those projects that it starts at the water tank up on Garrison Hill, comes down through Broadway, Florence Street, and continues that work. Will also be dovetailed into work that we're going to do on Central Avenue. The water main that comes right through the center of town all ties into this project.
The council also approved a contract for the turf treatment and mowing services on city fields. Chris, what does that entail?
So as part of a policy that the council adopted a few years ago, we want to have a more natural maintenance program for our turf fields. So this is lawns both at ball fields and at places like Henry Law Park where we have expanses. And so the idea was to get away from artificial fertilizers, et cetera, and go for a more natural turf maintenance plan. And so over the years, we've been ramping up these efforts. And this year, we're doubling down again, going with the same vendor, but with an increased supplier on the actual maintenance, the mowing, et cetera. As Councilor Cullen said during the approval, we really need to look at the return on the investment, though, and recognize both the environmental benefits, but also does it actually improve the use of the fields, and does it get into the return on investment that the citizens expect?
And lastly, you have Mayor Robert Carrier proclamations for Mental Health Awareness Month, which occurs during May, and for National Volunteer Week in April. The mayor and city council also honored the Dover varsity cheerleading squad, which was crowned back-to-back state champions for fall of 2024 and winter 2025. And they were also, for the first time in the program's history, the New England's co-ed champions.
That's great. And it was a really good turnout for all of those proclamations. And we appreciate our volunteers and people that continue to make this community what it is. Erin, how are you going to top all that?
I'll try. The first planning board meeting of the month, community development planner Dave Carpenter provided a presentation to the board on a couple of plans and some proposed funding related to the community development block grant program. That's the fiscal year 26 to 30 consolidated plan, fiscal year 26 action plan, and again, proposed spending for the program. All of those items were endorsed by the planning board during the meeting. And the board also approved a CUP and site plan related to a project at 512 6th Street. This project is to construct 5 single-family homes at the site, and the CUP was related to some environmental impacts related to site grading at the site. That CUP had previously been endorsed by the Conservation Commission.
And if I recall, having actually attended that Conservation Commission meeting, the unit count didn't increase the request for the CUP. Their grading needs would have been required regardless of the density.
That's correct. That's a requirement of the TDR program. 3 of the units for this project had been approved through TDR, so the applicant had to show that any environmental impacts was not caused by additional density. The second planning board meeting of the month was pretty light. Most of the applicants requested a continuance for their applications. The board actually only approved one application. It was a waiver for a resident related to dated subdivision requirements for his home. And because most of those applications were continued, you can expect to see them in coming weeks and months at future meetings.
Did I notice that because of the free time, the planning board did some training and some updating and reminding for new members about the role and responsibilities of the planning board?
That's correct. Director Ben did kind of a planning board 101 for the board members. Some board members have been there a while, some are newer, but it's always good to get a refresh on the roles and responsibilities of the board.
And if I understand correctly, she's planning on doing something similar for the zoning board and other boards, just to refresh, as you say, some members that have been there for a while. It's always good to remind them, but others, we've had a lot of turnover, a lot of good new volunteerism, and we want to keep them educated as well.
That's correct. And another thing the planning department's working on is actually creating a handbook for each of the different land use boards. So again, even for older members or newer members, just to have kind of guidelines and something to reference for their roles and responsibilities.
Great.
And the subcommittee of the planning board that's reviewing the TDR ordinance met for the first time. They went over some committee goals, which could include recommendations for amendments for the TDR ordinance. And I also believe you were there to provide a history of the ordinance.
Right. As the parent or a parent of the ordinance, thought that it was good for me to go and speak to spirit and intent and remind the board or the subcommittee, as it were, that while rules are there, they should be rewritten and maintained for what is current as opposed to just being locked into the past. So it's really good that the planning board looks at these things from time to time and not just sits back and says, well, they're there, so let's use them.
And the subcommittee will continue to meet, so we'll have continued updates on their work. And another ad hoc committee of the planning board, the committee to address community housing needs, met twice in April for workshop sessions. They're finishing up their final report, which will include recommendations for housing and existing conditions in Dover. So we can expect that pretty soon.
So will that information go right to the council, or will it be incorporated into the land use chapter of the master plan and then brought forward?
So we do actually have a representative from the committee on our land use steering committee. So there's been input since the start of the master plan chapter update. So we're, of course, bringing in their recommendations in the master planning process, but it will also be presented to council.
Great.
And a couple other meetings, the Conservation Commission met and endorsed a CUP for a proposal at 210 Tolan. The CUP is part of an open space subdivision proposal. 29 units are proposed for the site, and the CUP was specific to a small section of the site that's within the secondary groundwater protection district in Dover and related to impervious surface coverage, again, within a small section of that site. And the Conservation Commission reviewed the application and endorsed it. And the zoning board also met in April. They granted 2 variances, one related to ADU size, another was related to commercial requirements for business. But the board also granted a rehearing request related to a previously approved special exception at 9 Maple Street. That rehearing will take place next month. That's all I got.
That sounds good. Just to throw in a couple other groups, the Parking Commission met in April and they reviewed a plan from some residents about changing and reducing the amount of parking on Henry Law Avenue as part of the reconstruction project we're about to undertake. This was in order to improve bike lane capacity and have a dedicated bike lane as opposed to having sharrows, which is what our current plans indicate on the reconstruction plan. And then the Waterfront Committee met to look at or consider what it wants to do now that Great Bay Rowing won't be on the lawn area. And the committee decided to leave it as gathering space and open space and try to have things like a farmer's market or movies or other uses there for visualization. The space is a little bit smaller than the space in front of the library, the grass space between Locust Street and the library. That's about the square footage we're talking about on River Street. Those 2 groups will probably meet in May. We'll have an update then, just as we'll have an update on the planning side of things and on the council and legislative side of things. Unless you 2 have anything else to add, I think we want to bid the listener good day and move on.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for listening to the Dover Download this week. If you like what you heard, subscribe through your favorite podcast aggregator. And if you have something you want to hear a topic on, let us know. Finally, this is just one of the many ways we share information about the City of Dover. You can subscribe to the Dover Downloads email newsletter every week or other newsletters that we have by going to the City of Dover homepage, www.dover.nh.gov. Have a great week.